Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snider, and we are broadcasting live from the beautiful Dillon State Park here in East Central Ohio. I'd like to thank all of you that have tuned in this evening. If you haven't pressed the follow button at the top of the web page, please do so. And I'd like to let you know that all the music you hear on Ohio Exopolitics is performed by your host. Tonight, our guest is Jay Weidner, and he has been called by Wired magazine as an authority on the Hermetic and alchemical traditions, an erudite conspiracy hunter. Jay is a renowned author, filmmaker, Hermetic scholar, considered to be a modern-day Indiana Jones for his ongoing worldwide quest to find clues to mankind's spiritual destiny via ancient societies and artifacts. His bodies of work offers great insights into the circumstances that led to the current global crisis. He is a producer of documentary films 2012, The Odyssey, and its sequel Time Wave 2013. And he's also the director of Kubrick's Odyssey, which we will be speaking of tonight. And I'd like to welcome Jay back to the show. Jay, how are you this evening?
Hey, I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing super. I wondered, before we get into your movie, Kubrick's Odyssey, I wondered if you would be willing to discuss Fukushima a little bit. To me, it's probably going to turn out to be the greatest disaster that the human race has yet faced, and I wonder what your thoughts were, Jay.
I'm 100% with you, and I think it's extremely disconcerting that no one's reporting the truth. Although it's now starting to be reported, but it's been off the radar for so long that the stories are buried and not really being talked about much. But we have at least 3 meltdowns going, and maybe as many as 6. And this is a neutron bomb going off about every 2 hours, and it's been going off every 2 hours since March 11th. And it is. I live on the West Coast, and I'm keeping track with my Geiger counter, and it's getting worse. It's all over the place. It's mostly in the rain, and interestingly enough, one storm after another. Usually, the jet stream goes up into British Columbia by this time of year, and the United States begins warming up, and then hot weather and the high pressure systems come in. But this year it has not happened, and the jet stream is still pouring in on us, especially us poor folks in Oregon, and we're getting really hit with a lot of radiation that they're not talking about, and it's very serious and very scary, and no one but a few websites are actually giving us the scoop on it. And it proves, without any shadow of a doubt, that the major media is completely controlled. I mean, if you want proof of it, look at, it was around March 24th or so, when, about 2 weeks after it started, when it became obvious to anyone watching that TEPCO was lying, that's a Tokyo power company, and that everything was 10 times worse, maybe 100 times, maybe 1,000 times worse than they were telling us. And then there was a news freeze out around that date, and it really has never come back. Every story on Drudge, it didn't matter what it was, CNN, Fox, the whole spectrum of the mainstream media was covering it, and then all of it on the same day they quit covering it. And that is a concerted effort to hide the very dangerous facts from us. It's going to fall into our water supply. It's cumulative. It's going to get into the vegetables, especially the meat and the milk and cheese. And you're gonna get it on your clothes. You're gonna walk into your house. You're gonna sit on your couch. Your couch is gonna be contaminated. You're gonna put your clothes in the clothes dryer with all the other clothes, and all your clothes are gonna get contaminated. Every time you touch a dish, this is what's gonna happen until your entire house, all your clothing, your car, your pets, everything are contaminated. It's really scary. And a lot of people are moving to the southern hemisphere, by the way.
Jay, I totally agree with you. It's just so horrendous. And I know what your answer to this next question will be, but I thought I would ask it anyway. I have come to the conclusion that nuclear power just cannot be used in a safe manner, and that eventually we'll have to face these Fukushima-type events again that will keep occurring no matter what kind of precautions are taken. And I wondered if you could comment on that.
Well, yeah, of course, I'm with you all the way, and you're right. I mean, there's 2 plants in California right on the beach, right on fault lines, with millions of people around them, and there's one in they're all over the place, and they're going to go, and the whole idea of it is just really not very smart, and I think we're, I got to be honest with you. The thing with Fukushima that really bothers me is besides the obvious, is to me, it is a no-brainer. Every country in the world should be sending their greatest scientists, their best engineers, to the area, maybe not into the area, but to at least into some centralized place where they can brainstorm and come up with an idea to save the world. And they're not even talking about it. Obama never mentions it, has never mentioned it, I don't think. And so that tells me that one of 2 things is going on. Either the general IQ of the human race has suddenly dropped, and I'm the smartest person on Earth now, and only I can think of that we ought to have a group of scientists from Russia and China and America and Europe helping those people in Japan so that none of us get radiation. Or 2, they could give a dang, and they hope we all die. And I don't know which one it is. But either one is not good.
I totally agree with you, Jay. My barber was cutting my hair the other day, and I mentioned Fukushima, and he hadn't even heard of it. So,
no.
What a situation.
Wave after wave blowing across the United States right now. Nobody talking about it.
It's surrealistic, which kind of moves right into Stanley Kubrick's movies, which I think have a strong sense of surrealism. And also, he has a real process to his approach, doesn't he?
Yeah, Stanley was a genius. Had a genius IQ. Was considered really in his late teens and early 20s to be one of the best upcoming chess players in the world. People said he could have been as good as Bobby Fischer, but he. So he had this, he was already had a really high IQ. He did terrible at school, and so I think he always felt, maybe a little like an underachiever. And so but when he found movies, he used that same mind to dissect film and to understand it, and then finally to come up with ways to tell cinema stories in a very unconventional manner, both overtly and covertly. In other words, at the end of his career, especially The Shining and Eyes Wide Shut, he wasn't making the film that you think you're watching. You're actually watching another film. Actually, you're watching about 7 or 8 other films, and with different storylines and characters and mythologies and archetypes, and I think what happened is that he just got really bored after Barry Lyndon, and he wanted to make a movie that was as well done visually as the paintings of the great master painters, and he did it. He achieved it. And by the way, it's being released in Blu-ray next week, so we'll finally see the Blu-ray beautiful Stanley Kubrick Barry Lyndon version. And I think he got bored. And so The Shining, which is really probably one of the most interesting films ever made, is an overlay of subliminal imagery and secret storylines and strange, the way that the shots are lined up had to have taken, people say, Stanley would take 70 takes. Well, now I know why. because he was trying to find an effect in the take, and it took 70 takes for him to get it, make sure he got it. And so all of Stanley Kubrick's films are these extremely well thought out works, and they all have what we all like. I think best about Kubrick is his fearless intelligence, and it's just so refreshing. You know, I love Steven Spielberg, but you know, he makes films like a 12-year-old, and you know, and if I'm in a 12-year-old frame of mind, it's all right. But you know, very few filmmakers can actually make a film for intelligent people. Stanley was one who never let intelligent people down, and I think that's what we owe him best. That you know, Hollywood actually had the guts to finance this guy and his weird ideas.
I'm going to put your website in the chat room, Jay. That's jweidner.com. Is there any significance to the fact that Stanley Kubrick didn't he live in England for quite some time?
Yeah, he lived in a little town called St. Albans. It's just south of London. And it was a quick drive to the Boreham Woods and Shepperton Studios. So, but he lived there for a lot of reasons. I don't think he really liked. I don't think he really liked America, and I think he got involved, of course, in some extreme doings of the elite, and thought that the buffer of the Atlantic Ocean would add another layer of protection for him. I think it probably did. And those 6 or 10-foot walls with the barbed wire around his estate didn't hurt either. And so he was, you know, he wasn't really a recluse. Everyone calls him, you know, a recluse, but he was probably more likely paranoid, I would think. And so his paranoia drove him to do a lot of things, like move to England and live in a walled-off estate and never talk to anybody and all that. So, you know, but there's so much underneath the story of Stanley that, you know, one day maybe someone will get into his archives with knowing what I've been putting out recently and find a lot of things. I think that's going to happen.
Well, can you give us an overview of your movie, The Kubrick's Odyssey?
Yeah, Kubrick's Odyssey, Secrets Hidden in the Films of Stanley Kubrick, Part 1, is to a 3-part trilogy, is about how Stanley went from just being a filmmaker to being working with the elites or the people that rule the world to achieve something that could only be done by Stanley Kubrick. And that was, and this is going to probably make a lot of people angry, but that was of Kubrick faking the Apollo moon landings. And I can already hear, you know, half the audience going, oh, and I know that sounds crazy. You know, everybody thinks we went to the moon, and I think we went to the moon too. But I don't think we went the way that they showed us, and I think that they hired Stanley Kubrick to make the films, all of the Apollo films, starting with Apollo 11, and then what he did was he used the making of 2001: A Space Odyssey as a research and development project to develop the technology, cinema technology, needed to do the lunar filming. And he used a technique called front screen projection, and I show how it works in this film, and then I show the fingerprints of its usage, certain fingerprints that are evident every time that front screen projection, an old antiquated cinematic process now in the age of computers, but then a very advanced form of cinema trickery. And I show both in the Apollo footage, the Apollo photos, the same exact fingerprints. In fact, I would say that if there's one thing that Kubrick's Odyssey is going to do, that it's going to have an historical effect, is that whether you believe Stanley Kubrick directed the Apollo moon landings or not, after viewing Kubrick's Odyssey, I guarantee your view of the Apollo imagery will forever be changed. And you will find yourself looking for the fingerprints, and you will see them on every photograph. And so if nothing else, the film proves beyond any shadow of a doubt, as far as I'm concerned, that the Apollo photographs, Apollo movie and video imagery is faked, and it was faked using front screen projection.
With that front screen projection, I think they actually project a scene behind the actors, and if the listeners will notice the photographs that are appearing on the player for the show now, you'll notice that on the moon landing photograph, there's a line that Jay draws right where the soundstage ends and the background begins. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Jay?
Yeah, basically, what it would do is a very technical thing. I'll do my best on the radio to explain something visual. It's what you do is you have a very highly lit screen. And none of this was possible until the 3M company invented actually a glass bead. And they sewed together millions of these little glass beads, little tiny .004 millimeter, and lined them up on the screen, and they were highly reflective, reflecting back about 70% of the light that hits them. A normal mirror reflects back about 40. So it was a highly reflective surface, and then he projected gigantic slides, 8 by 10 Ektachrome slides. This is in the movie 2001, but also I'm sure he did the same process in the Apollo footage. He projected those onto the screen, and then he moves his actors in front of the projection, and then using a beam splitter, his camera can gather up the light and have an exposure, and then the trick is in evidence. So in 2001, the ape scenes at the beginning are all shot indoors on a soundstage, and I show the soundstage in the movie. And those apes that you think are out on the desert are actually not out in the desert at all. They're on a soundstage, and they're having desert scenes projected around them. It's all done very, very carefully and very well done, and it looks like they're outside. It has a weird, surreal quality to it also because everything is in focus, because the screen is actually right behind the actor, so the plane of focus is a very small plane of focus, not like if you were actually shooting outside where you'd have a very large plane of focus. So you always have the shots as everything is in focus, unless, the background shot has been intentionally shot out of focus, which he also was doing. So those are the two. The third thing that proves front screen projection is the problem is that you have to hide the bottom of the screen. And so Kubrick carefully put rocks and grass and debris between the ape scene sets and the front screen projection to hide them, and I show how he does it in the movie. And that same modus operandi is evidenced in the Apollo footage repeatedly, and there's a change in the texture on the ground, always. That's another signature of the set, the dirt or whatever you have on your set, and the dirt or the ground texture in the screen behind the set. So you'll see everything, and you'll be able to count the granules of the dirt in the foreground, but as soon as it passes beyond that line, it turns into a kind of an amorphous visual thing. And Kubrick couldn't get around that. That was just one of the fallbacks of this kind of technology. And so, I'm sure that he knew that somebody would see it. Now, I'll even go one step further. I'm pretty sure that this is actually fairly well known information among, say, older people in Hollywood. People older than me in their 60s and 70s and maybe 80s. I think they saw it, recognized it, and just decided to, maybe talk about it within their own circles, but not to really ever come forth with it like I have.
And Jay, what was the purpose of faking the moon landings?
Well, I mean, it was multi-purposeful. One of the most obvious ones is we never had soft landed anything. We tried to test the lunar lander. Neil Armstrong did and almost killed himself. That was the only soft landing test of a rocket ever in Earth's history, still to this day, on this planet. But on a foreign planet that no one had ever been to, they managed to land a soft landing 6 straight times without a hitch. Now, anybody that's ever dealt with technology knows that, wow, that is one incredible record. I mean, that's just amazing. But assuming that they did it, but the chances are actually that failure was a very high percentage chance, more like a 70% chance of failure, of something going wrong, of hitting a rock as you're landing and upending the lunar lander. How are you going to get it back up? How are you going to fix it? Do we really want to sit there for 6-7 days on live television watching 2 of our finest gentlemen dying of radiation exposure, of the air conditioning systems on the LEM starting to break down, that kind of thing? And the answer, Nixon's president, so you can tell me what he would do. I think I know. Nixon, cared more about, how he looked and how the United States looked than he cared about the truth. And we know that. He had to resign because of that. And I think that Nixon gave the order that it was going to be faked. Well, it was already in the process, but I mean, Nixon gave the order that they were going to use the Kubrick footage. In other words, they may have shot the Kubrick footage only as a backup plan, you see, and then, they were going to wait till decide whether they were actually going to use it. And I think that they decided to use it. Now, I want to reiterate, I do believe that men have gone to the moon. There's reflectors on the moon. Lasers can hit them. The moon rocks are real. I'm sure that there's all sorts of stuff up there, but it's not the way that we think it is. That's all I'm saying.
Do you think that faking the moon landings had an adverse effect on Stanley Kubrick's health?
Yeah, I do. I think he. I think that scene in The Shining, which is not in the book, which is where Jack Nicholson goes into the room 237, and there's a young, beautiful lady getting out of the bathtub, and she kisses him. Then he looks in the mirror, and he sees the old lady, and she starts laughing at him. I think that sums it up. That's how he viewed the whole thing. He got into it thinking it was the best thing that had ever happened to him. It was a sexy lady who wanted to have sex with him, and it ended up being an ugly hag laughing at him with him terrified. And I think that's why that scene's in there, and I think that's why he lived on the estate at St. Albans with the high walls, and why he was reportedly always patrolling it in his golf cart with a loaded shotgun. I think it wasn't fans that he was afraid of. I think that he accidentally told somebody that he was involved in the Apollo faking, and that person got killed. And I think from that point on, his whole attitude towards the entire elite, what he was doing with them and everything was forever altered. And he went back into a womb and refused to come out.
The people that are running this world are awfully brutal, aren't they?
Well, they are, and they're thugs, they're gangsters, and they may be worse than that. And you have to also ask yourselves, what really happened with the moon program? Where did the $40 billion go? $40 billion in those years, that's a lot of money now, about $500 billion. Where did it go? What's really going on? How come we never went back to the moon? And then, you start getting into all sorts of stuff, and it gets very interesting. And it's really one of the most interesting subjects around, actually.
Do you think the astronauts went through some kind of mind control so that they actually believe that they went to the moon?
It's a really good question. I don't know how they did it. I'm thinking that it was some form of the libido technique that he shows in Clockwork Orange, where they give you drugs and then show you films of what they want you to get, where the drugs make you sick, and then they show you films of what so that you will get sick every time you mention whatever it is they don't want you to mention. And the reason I think that is Buzz Aldrin's book, which came out right after the moon landings, Apollo 11. I think it's called Return to Earth. I think you can get it on Amazon for about 30 cents now. You read that book, and he talks about the 1-year anniversary of the Apollo moon landings, and he's at a big convention celebrating it in Las Vegas, and he's on stage, and a reporter says, "Hey, Buzz, what really happened up on the moon? Tell us." And then you just read Buzz's words, and it's, my stomach started collapsing in on itself. I couldn't breathe. I was gasping for air. I wanted to throw up, and I had to go out in the alley where my wife and I calmed me down for an hour. And it's like, well, that's a pretty strange story to be putting in your book. Also, one of my old acquaintances, who's now passed away, unfortunately, Robert Masters, was one of the top psychotherapists in the country. Works with people like Margaret Mead and Jean Houston, and a lot of people. And he told me that Edgar Mitchell, or is it Edwin? Edwin Mitchell came to him in let's see, it must have been about 1975, 76, and asked him to hypnotize him. And when Bob said, well, what do you want? Why do you want me to hypnotize you? He said, I can't remember what it was like to be on the moon, and I want to know. And according to Bob, they went through about 15 very serious sessions, and they couldn't recover the memories. And that's because there weren't any.
That's a good point. I never thought of it that way. I figured they'd recover something, but there wasn't anything to recover.
Yeah, and I think that's why Neil Armstrong could have been a senator from Ohio, right? You're from Ohio, right? Is he from Ohio? Yeah. And he could have been a senator from Ohio. You could have had John Glenn and Neil Armstrong at the same time, right? He could have done anything. He could have pulled any meal ticket he wanted, anything. He could have even ended up being president. You know what he did? He skinnied away to his farm in Ohio and has never been heard from again.
Yeah, I think it's in Lebanon, Ohio, or somewhere near Lebanon. Yeah, and
right.
Became a reg-
Just like Stanley. I think they all do that.
Yeah. Jay, I have a caller if you'd like to take a call now.
Yeah.
And Judith, welcome to the show. Fire away.
Hello, thank you. I wanted to ask you, and I ask your forgiveness, I don't remember the spaceship that was supposed to have gone up where I think it was Judith or was a woman on that flight.
Oh, Challenger.
And it crashed. It blew up.
Yeah, Judith Resnick.
Did anything really happen to those people, or were they taken someplace else and nothing really blew up?
Oh no, something really blew up. My own personal opinion is that some silly politician had advocated that we have a citizens in space program, and so they took her, Christy McAuliffe, was that it? I can't remember her name now. And so they took the school teacher, I think it was Christy McAuliffe, and they said, okay, she'll be the first citizen in space. And then the Challenger blew up on the pad. Now I don't know, they said a seal ring broke and everything, and that's what happened. And after it took off, it blew up. But it could be argued that they really don't want any citizens outside of their purview going anywhere in space and looking around. That's what I would say.
I agree with you, but I was wondering, now do you feel like we have never gone to the moon? We have never landed on the moon?
Well, here's what it is. We could have never sent a man to the moon. We could have sent robots. The Russians did that. They picked up moon rocks and brought them back and everything. They never sent a man to the moon. In fact, sending a man to the moon is really kind of stupid, because you see, standing on the surface of the moon, it's 250 degrees above zero in the sun, and in the shade, it's 250 degrees below zero. So those guys, when they're standing there in their spacesuits, the side that's facing the sun, the side their suit is 250 degrees above zero, and their back, which is facing the shadow, is 250 degrees below zero. So you need an air conditioning system that can equalize 500 degrees. That's a pretty amazing air conditioning, especially running off a few D-cell batteries.
That would never work.
Yeah, that must be why they got rid of all those suits and all the blueprints. But anyway, and by the way, to be able to stand the radiation on the moon, that suit must have been the most amazing suit ever, and all they have to do is give the suits that they have from NASA to the workers at Fukushima, and then they can go in and fix that thing. You see? Because there's so many rads on the moon, it's not even funny. But those astronauts all came back, they're all still alive. But the real interesting thing about the moon, and this is where people are going to think I'm really gone over the edge, is NASA compiled a report called the Translunar Phenomena Report, and you can get it on the Internet. It was a very secret report. It took me years to find it. Now it's up on the Internet. And this is a blow-by-blow account chronicled by NASA of astronomers all the way back to Galileo, who invented the telescope, of what they saw on the moon, anything unusual, translunar phenomena. And, there's hundreds of pages of this, and it's very, very interesting reading. And they see lights, they see ships, they see bridges, they see all sorts of stuff. And I'm talking about very famous, credible astronomers like Herschel and Halley and a lot of others. And if you look at the compilation, you'll see that about 60% of the sightings that they saw through their telescopes over the 400-year period were in a crater called Aristarchus. And Apollo went over Aristarchus and took a picture, and it was just nothing there. It was just kind of a crummy moon scene, boring. And so everyone just, I don't know what it is, right? Well, Clementine, which is a Pentagon mission that went to the moon in the 90s, did hundreds of thousands of digital photographs of the moon, of which very few have actually been released and examined, photographed Aristarchus. And there, in two separate Clementine photographs, high-resolution digital photograph, not the lousy film that the supposed astronomers had, or astronauts had, right there on Aristarchus, and you can type it in, just type in Blue Dome Aristarchus crater, and you'll see the pictures, they're all over the Internet, is a gigantic blue dome with geometry and structure, and it's miles wide, and it's there, and there's no doubt it's there. And if they've been seeing something flashing in strange blue lights over Aristarchus for 400 years, then one can only draw the conclusion that there's been activity on the moon for at least 400 years. And that right there should put a crimp in anybody's view of reality.
Well, I wanted to ask you, do you believe then that there are actually galaxies where there are people living on other planets besides ours?
Well, I mean, I've always thought that the chances of somebody being on other beings, of course, is extremely high. But I always resisted the alien hypothesis because I could track the UFO technology back to Nazi Germany, and so Occam's razor says the simplest answer is usually the right one. So I decided that it was impossible aliens were not aliens were possible, but aliens were unnecessary, and that we had more like a nefarious group of people that were using mind control techniques and scaring us with abductions and using their UFOs to do strange things to us and all that. I have since, because the research demanded it, I've had to change my view, and I have reluctantly am beginning to accept the possibility of an extremely nefarious force of off-planet entities who are basically using the Earth as their farm, and I don't mean for food.
Right. I think you're very right. I also feel that there are good, just like here on Earth, there is good and evil within the groups that are visiting.
Well, I hope the good guys will come soon, because I'm getting real tired of the bad guys. And if they're out there listening, up in your ships, we need help, and we need it now. You can't wait any longer. Fukushima is going to kill all of us, and so if there is intervention, if you're right, then this is the time to come. I've got to be honest with you, though. I don't think anybody's going to come. Mm-hmm. And that is not good for us. And so, I tell people that, we're in the end game now, and we got to all stay twitchy.
Don't you feel that our government itself has spaceships that are even like in the Earth? They have areas in the Earth?
Oh, yeah, there's tunnel systems all under the Earth. They're tunneling probably all over the place right now. They have the machines that they've had since the 60s. You can Google it and see them on the. They were featured in that movie Total Recall. They're tunneling that can do 10 feet an hour, nuclear-powered tunneling machines, and they're tunneling all over underneath. And there's also ancient tunnels which have been built under the Earth also. So there's a lot of things going on that normal people would absolutely, completely freak out if they knew the truth. And it's even worse than that.
The trillions of money that Obama borrowed, only a very, very small fraction of that ever went to the people. What do you think he did with it?
Well, Obama spent it on his cronies. He spent it on making sure that everybody had a lot of money. It was a slush fund. It's a political slush fund. We, the American people, gave the Barack Obama and the Democrats about, and you're absolutely right, about $600 billion to use to solidify their so-called revolution. It was one of the most blatant criminal acts in U.S. history, and nobody's reporting it.
So then, do you also believe that things are being set up like FEMA to where they have camps and so forth already?
Oh yeah, absolutely, for sure. What's going on here is, and I don't, everybody's going to get really upset again, but it's essentially the communists never actually fell in Russia. They pulled a chess move called a gambit, and they looked like that they lost, so that we would let down our guard, which is a classic chess move. And we let down our guard, and they immediately moved in several million criminals that are now called the Russian Mafia. They infiltrated Israel with their agents, and then they got into Mossad and Israeli intelligence, and then those Israeli intelligence people infiltrated into the CIA and our intelligence agencies, and then China was working the other side, and we are about to be taken down by our nemesis, our ancient old nemesis, and you people that are listening are not going to like what's about to happen.
Mm-hmm. The things that we fought Hitler for and supposedly won are the very things that our own country is taking over and perpetrating to do on us.
Yeah, they're using the same techniques. Hitler was part of the same group that's trying to take us down. It's they don't stop. They're like the ever-ready rabbit, that never stops. They don't stop. They don't quit. They never go to sleep. They're like the Terminator. They just keep coming, and they keep coming, and they don't stop, and you can't rest for a moment. And they seek complete totalitarian rule over the entire planet, and they believe that the United States is the domino, that when it falls, the rest falls. And I guarantee that their analysis is 100% right. So, you can move to Australia, you can move to New Zealand or Canada or something. When we go, they go. So there's no place safe. And we're not going to be very happy. And it's not going to be what you think it is and what they're selling it to you as. It is not going to be. It's going to be, universal health care. And if you've ever dissented against the government, you think you're going to get health care? You think you're going to get health care if you burned your draft card or you went out and protested against something? You think that? You know why they're giving student loans to everybody? You know why Obama wants everybody to have free student loans? Because you think any of those students are ever going to protest against the government if the government's paying their way all the way? It's ingenious. This is ingenious, folks.
In other words, they're already bought and paid for.
Exactly. And they're going right after the populations that will agitate. That's why Obama's black. Make sure the African-American population stays down on the farm. They're the one group that actually could have ignited something, but now they're completely compliant with the government, even though just 2.5 years ago they were completely anti-government.
Well, and that's one reason Obama would like to more or less take down the wall between Mexico and the United States.
Absolutely, they want to flood the country with so many various demographics that it's like the Tower of Babel. So nobody can talk, nobody can communicate, and then they can rule through total confusion.
Well, that would mean that many more votes for him, and they would not.
Absolutely.
Until after they had done it, that they actually voted themselves in.
That's exactly right.
They've done themselves in.
That's exactly right, and we're selling ourselves down the river for a possible, Medicare, possible Social Security, and possible free health care, and I contend to you that none of that's going to happen. None of that. In fact, what's going to happen is going to get very serious because qualitative easing number 3 is about to start. All the revolutions that have been going on this year were actually fueled by quantitative easing number 1 and 2, which caused commodity prices to skyrocket, and so there were food riots in Tunisia and Libya and Egypt and India and China. And he's doing a third one, which means that food prices are going to go up again all over the world, another 20%. Gasoline prices are skyrocketing. All food is based on petroleum. If you get $200 a month in food stamps, and right now that's feeding you and maybe your husband or something, in a year, that $200 is going to buy you maybe a week of food. In 2 years, you'll be lucky to get 2 days of food for $200. What's going to happen then?
Oh, my. In other words, this is really Lord of the Rings.
It is.
Where just one...
Where's Frodo?
Yes. It's one robot after another coming at us.
Yeah. And soulless, and in some ways they're kind of crazy because they have not. Most of these people, Barack included, have never actually ever been in the real world, and so everything they're doing is a fantasy. That's the way that these people always are. They think they're the smartest guys in the room, but actually they're living in a fantasy world. And so when they make decisions, they don't make it on real things that affect people. In fact, they don't even care about people. The story I always bring up is when Mao took over China. He was wondering why the farmers, he could get the farmers to produce more food for the people, and he was driving around the farms and the rice paddies, and he saw all these sparrows out on the stalks of rice, and he went back to Beijing, and he passed an edict that he would give something like 25 cents for each sparrow brought in dead, because they were eating the rice crops. And the farmers that were his advisor kept saying, no, wait a minute here. That's not true. They're not eating the rice. They're eating bugs. And the bugs are just on the rice. And Mao, of course, of being a superior intellect and never being a farmer, he knew that the sparrows were eating the rice. And so you can get on Google and look, and there's the films of, hundreds of mounds of dead sparrows, 10, 20, 30 feet high, that these poor people killed because he was giving them money for them. And the next year was the biggest rice crop failure in the history of the world, and almost brought China down to its knees, and it's because the sparrows were eating the bugs that were eating the rice, and now there was nothing to eat the bugs. And this is how these people think. This is how they do everything. It's like thinking that the health care plan is going to be good for anyone. You must be insane, because you're immediately adding, by their own accounts, 30 million people to the rolls. So that means that the doctors that are here now have to see 30 million more people. Then when you legalize the 25 to 40 million illegal aliens, now you're up to 70 million you've added to the rolls. But you've got the same amount of doctors. So there's no other way around it. There's going to be rationing. There's going to be months and months and months before you get an appointment. People with cancer are going to die. It's an insanity is what it is.
Today, it isn't even safe to go to a doctor, because if you knew what was going to happen to you when you went, you wouldn't even go, because what you're getting today is not treatment for what's wrong with you. You're being fed poison.
That's exactly right.
You're fed poison pills.
Well, let me contend to you this. The health care plan's real goal is to feed you poison and get you out of here, so they don't have to support you anymore.
True, very true. I don't see any hope for our country unless you got rid of the millionaires that are in Washington, D.C., or ruling our governments, because it's only the very average, very intelligent person that's not a millionaire that would really stand up for what we need or want in this country.
Well, I don't think the problem is that centralization of power does not work, and it just creates a vacuum so that a dictatorship can walk in. And I really don't. I mean, I'd love Washington D.C. I love the Smithsonian, but you know what? Those people have nothing to do with the people here in Oregon. We're not anything like them, and I know the people in Ohio aren't anything like them. And so, I don't really want them telling me what to do. I don't want them. I don't want anything to do with them, actually. I'm not even sure why we're all together in this big country, because we're not really a big country. We're a bunch of little tiny places, and we should govern ourselves out here, and you guys there should govern yourselves, and you shouldn't have to pay fealty to the government and send your kids off to war and be forced to use pesticides, that you don't want, and GMOs that you don't want, and school systems that you don't want, and so I'm against the centralization of power in every way, shape, and form.
I was at a wedding in Washington, D.C., and I was shocked at meeting these people. It was as though they were dead, as though they were like a robot walking around. and they knew exactly which person to talk to, which one not to talk with, and who would do the most for them.
Oh, yeah.
There was nothing human in the whole thing. It was just like they were robots.
Well, they are. I mean, that's what's going on, is the human race is being, these off-planet intelligences have decided that the best way to rule us is to remove our humanness. And so, movies, television, mass entertainment, everything is this long process of trying to remove our sense of humanity. And we become inured to violence and hatred, and we don't, we're in a third war. Where's the protest? We're in 3 wars. Where's the protest? What happened to the anti-war? Cindy Sheehan. What happened here?
Good point. Judith,
Mark,
those were questions.
Am I talking too long?
No, that's fine. I always like your questions. They were great, Judith. You really added a lot to the show.
Oh. Well, I was just, my last one, the fact that it seems like Obama, his family and the people there, they have no worry about anything happening to them, as though they were in an isolated bubble separate from everyone else.
Well, he's got a pension for the rest of his life. Are you kidding me? He's already made $5 million on book deals. I'm sure Michelle's going to make another $5 million. Are you kidding me? They're set up for the rest of their lives.
But that doesn't save them from radiation and from nuclear bomb, nuclear plants.
Yeah, no, that's the $1 million question. Then that can only be then the answer to my previous question. It can only be then that we've got the Three Stooges running everything.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'd rather have a conspiracy.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with me.
Thanks, Judith. Great questions as always. Jay, we're down to the last 4 minutes. I want to tell everyone again, we're talking about Kubrick's Odyssey, Secrets Hidden in the Films of Stanley Kubrick, and this is part 1. And we're talking to Jay Weidner, and that's jayweidner.com. Jay, is there anything else you want to tell the folks? Speaking anywhere.
Part 2's coming out. If you want to find the film, go to my site sacredmysteries.com, where all of our other films, Infinity and the new David Icke Radical Truth is out, and a lot of real mind-blowing stuff. We also have a free station on YouTube, which got almost 400 completely free videos called Sacred Mysteries TV on YouTube, which I think you'll like. And part 2 of the film will be out this coming, hopefully, in about 7 or 8 months. We have a new feature film coming out called Shasta, which is about weird events on Mount Shasta. And life is good, except for the radiation, the fascists, and the general degradation of the environment.
Well, Jay, it's been a fascinating discussion, and I hope we can talk to you again, sir. Have a good evening.
All right. Thanks a lot, man.
Bye-bye.
How are you?
I'm doing super. I wondered, before we get into your movie, Kubrick's Odyssey, I wondered if you would be willing to discuss Fukushima a little bit. To me, it's probably going to turn out to be the greatest disaster that the human race has yet faced, and I wonder what your thoughts were, Jay.
I'm 100% with you, and I think it's extremely disconcerting that no one's reporting the truth, although it's now starting to be reported, but it's been off the radar for so long that the stories are buried and not really being talked about much. But we have at least 3 meltdowns going, and maybe as many as 6. And this is a neutron bomb going off about every 2 hours, and it's been going off every 2 hours since March 11th. And it is. I live on the West Coast, and I'm keeping track with my Geiger counter, and it's getting worse. It's all over the place. It's mostly in the rain, and interestingly enough, one storm after another, usually the jet stream, goes up into British Columbia by this time of year. It is a concerted effort to hide the very dangerous facts. from us. It's going to fall into our water supply. It's cumulative. It's going to get into the vegetables, especially the meat and the milk and cheese. And you're gonna get it on your clothes. You're gonna walk into your house. You're gonna sit on your couch. Your couch is going to be contaminated. You're going to put your clothes in the clothes dryer with all the other clothes, and all your clothes are going to get contaminated. Every time you touch a dish, this is what's going to happen until your entire house, all your clothing, your car, your pets, everything are contaminated. It's really scary. And a lot of people are moving to the southern hemisphere, by the way.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's just so horrendous. And I know what your answer to this next question will be, but I thought I would ask it anyway. I have come to the conclusion that nuclear power just cannot be used in a safe manner, and that eventually we'll have to face these Fukushima-type events again that will keep occurring no matter what kind of precautions are taken. And I wondered if you could comment on that.
Well, yeah, of course, I'm with you all the way, and you're right. I mean, there's two plans.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snider, and we are broadcasting live from the beautiful Dillon State Park here in East Central Ohio. I'd like to thank all of you that have tuned in this evening. If you haven't pressed the follow button at the top of the web page, please do so. And I'd like to let you know that all the music you hear on Ohio Exopolitics is performed by your host. Tonight, our guest is Jay Weidner, and he has been called by Wired magazine as an authority on the Hermetic and alchemical traditions, an erudite conspiracy hunter. Jay is a renowned author, filmmaker, Hermetic scholar, considered to be a modern-day Indiana Jones for his ongoing worldwide quest to find clues to mankind's spiritual destiny via ancient societies and artifacts. His bodies of work offers great insights into the circumstances that led to the current global crisis. He is a producer of documentary films 2012, The Odyssey, and its sequel Time Wave 2013. And he's also the director of Kubrick's Odyssey, which we will be speaking of tonight. And I'd like to welcome Jay back to the show. Jay, how are you this evening?
Hey, I'm great. In California, right on the beach, right on fault lines, with millions of people around them. And there's one in, they're all over the place. And they're going to go. And, the whole idea of it is just really not very smart. And I think we're, I got to be honest with you. The thing with Fukushima that really bothers me is besides the obvious, is to me, it is a no-brainer. Every country in the world should be sending their greatest scientists, their best engineers, to the area, maybe not into the area, but at least into some centralized place where they can brainstorm and come up with an idea to save the world. And they're not even talking about it. Obama never mentions it, has never mentioned it, I don't think. And so that tells me that one of two things is going on. Either the general IQ of the human race has suddenly dropped, and I'm the smartest person on Earth now, and only I can think of that we ought to have a group of scientists from Russia and the United States begins warming up, and then hot weather and the high pressure systems come in. But this year it has not happened, and the jet stream is still pouring in on us, especially us poor folks in Oregon, and we're getting really hit with a lot of radiation that they're not talking about, and it's very serious and very scary, and no one but a few websites are actually giving us the scoop on it, and it proves without any shadow of a doubt that the major media is completely controlled. I mean, if you want proof of it, look at, it was around March 24th or so, when about 2 weeks after it started, when it became obvious to anyone watching TEPCO was lying. That's a Tokyo power company, and that everything was 10 times worse, maybe 100 times, maybe 1,000 times worse than they were telling us. And then there was a news freeze out around that date, and it really has never come back. Every story on Drudge, it didn't matter what it was, CNN, Fox, the whole spectrum of the mainstream media was covering it, and then all of it on the same day they quit covering it, and